think we're going to be ready to go. Maria, is that a thumbs up on your end? Yep. Well, everyone, thanks for joining. I think we've got a really great quorum. We've got quite a few people, some beautiful faces that we remember. I see Julie on the left side of my screen. Hi, Julie. I'm so proud to be able to get us started here as a representative for the Green Apron Alliance Board. Just wanted to welcome you all. You know, the GAA is really kind of a mind melt of Marie, you know, many years back, that really is transformed into a full-fledged board this last year as of August. We're getting serious. We're actually getting some work done, and we're putting some things together, and it's been really amazing to watch. Really proud of the work that the team is doing, and I know you all will be too. In typical Starbucks fashion, we have some hardworking progressive leaders that are just helping keep the culture and values that we've all learned and known so well alive. I'm going to start out with a couple housekeeping tips for you. I know many of you have done Zoom calls because I can tell you have different backgrounds. So some of you are experts and maybe some of you are beginners. But here are a couple housekeeping tips for you. One, you have your mute on your screen. It's typically on the bottom left of your screen, so just make sure that you're muted. You can ask questions on the chat function, and the exciting and wonderful Alex Pentland is going to be curating chat questions and for all the panelists, so she'll be fielding those for you. Ultimately, what we want you to do too as members of GAA is when you get a chance, get onto the platform. It really is a great new platform that we're using. I love the functionality of the platform itself. So get on there, post, complete your profile, engage with others. We're starting to use it more and more, and I think the more we get to use it with each other, even if it's a simple chat function and reaching out, we'll be able to get use of full functionality here soon. Task board teams are starting to use it, and they're getting really excited about it. So we look forward to you to jump on board and getting on there and trying it out and just giving us more feedback. I get the great pleasure of announcing Lisa Smith, who probably some of you can see on that screen. Many of you worked with her before. Yeah, we'll give her a good, you know, or as we do on some of our Zoom calls, we'll do a clap. You know, Lisa is an amazing alumni partner who we've all been fortunate to work with. She is a founding board member with the GAA, and she's always a pleasure to work with. I just get so excited when I get a chance to spend time with Lisa, and I was so excited to be able to announce her as moderator today. Lisa, let me just give you a little bit of background if you all don't know about Lisa, but she was a senior communications lead for human resources programs and initiatives and campaigns over 8 years at Starbucks. I got to work with her on quite a few projects, and she was amazing at them. She's also managed enterprise civic engagement, community investment, and diversity inclusion immersion programs. I get that right, Lisa? Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a communications manager for IoT and mixed reality sales at Microsoft. What I would say is Lisa is usually comfortable being in the background as a communication person. She's very creative and smart, and she gets to be in the forefront today. And we're so proud of her, you know, taking that leap forward and being that moderator today. And we know she's going to do an amazing job. And I need to say nothing else because you all know how amazing Lisa is. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. Thanks for moderating today.
Thank you, Tony. Oh, it is so wonderful to see so many beautiful alumni today. I'm scrolling over and I'm like, oh my God, look at all these beautiful faces. And I can tell you what is amazing, that it feels good to be among family and friends. And I could say that this is going to be a great fireside chat. Buckle up, get comfortable, get your water, get your tea, get your coffee, get your juice, and really just sit back and really take the time to just immerse and open up your spirits to say and to really kind of glean all that we have to share tonight. So that's where I would start. I would echo Tony in that as a comms person, I'm definitely used to being in the background, but with a little shove from Marie and some of my other board members, here I am. So I just wanted to be, to let you know that I too am being vulnerable in this space of being out front. And I would want to say that this has also been a journey for me. I am an immigrant to this country. And I too went through the US educational system as a young child all the way up to now. And I really had to take the onus on me to step out and to learn more about what it meant to be an American in this country. And so like many of all of us kind of in the space of learning and listening and leaning in, I started my journey just a few years ago when the sad story of Trayvon Martin. And when that happened, my son was 9 years old at the time, and that really jolted me to think that even in my own neighborhood, as my son was growing up, that he could have a similar experience. And that forced me into really jumping full on into what is the experience that I've been having as a corporate person, what is the experience my son will be having. And this is what it's really all about. It's really taking that step to educate and inform ourselves right where we are. And what I did was go on a civil rights pilgrimage through the American South. I did that twice. And that was where I met one of our panelists as well that we'll meet. But I just wanted to tell you that that opportunity was an opportunity for me to challenge myself, challenge my own thinking, challenge my logic, and to look up and out in different ways as a result of my own experiences and what I was facing. So with that, I just wanted to set the stage just to give you a picture of who I am, where I'm coming from, and opening up to a wide variety of conversations and stories. So just, again, open up your mind, your spirit, your art, and all in the things that we know that Starbucks does. This is the moment to really be able to do that. And so one of the first things that we're going to do, as I had to challenge myself, I'm going to throw out a challenge for you guys. And for those of you who don't have your video on, I'd love to see you because that helps me, that energizes me. So if you can put your video on, that would be great so that I can see all of your faces. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, we're going to do a simple challenge. Okay, you guys ready? I want to see some nods. Let me screen over. Let me see you. Okay, I see you. Hi, Alicia Kemenek. I see you. So what I'm going to ask you to do is put up 10 fingers. And we're going to take a check your privilege challenge just to start. So here we go. Are you guys ready? I see 10 fingers all on your screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a finger down or as you hear the questions. So what you're going to do, put a finger down if you have ever been called a racial slur. Put a finger down if you have ever been followed in a store unnecessarily. Put a finger down if someone crossed the street to avoid passing you. Put a finger down if someone clinched their purse in an elevator when you got in. Put a finger down if you have ever been accused of not being able to afford something expensive. Put a finger down if you have not been given a pass on a citation that you didn't deserve. Put a finger down if you've had fear in your heart when stopped by the police. Put a finger down if you've ever had to teach your child how not to get killed by the police. Any fingers up? That's privilege. Okay, that's privilege. So what this conversation is going to be about is for us to understand the privilege that we have, and that privilege that we have is the influence that gives us the energy and the power to move forward. And so what we're going to do through our panel conversation this evening is to really look at the influences that we have and how we can uncover them to really accelerate racial equity from where we are. Make sense, everybody? I see some nods. All right, awesome. So before we get into that, let me introduce our esteemed panel. I have some notes here, so do mind if I'm looking down. First, we have James Thomas right here in the Seattle area. James is a team leader and a diversity and inclusion practitioner. He joined Starbucks as a district manager in 2017 and was most recently a senior manager for the IDEA team before becoming an alumni in June of this month. So welcome, James. Sam, give him a warm welcome. Hey, James. Next, we have Katherine Cheng. Saying that right, Katherine. She is the head of Global Community Impact at Expedia. Katherine oversees CSR strategy, sustainability, corporate grants, and employee giving. Katherine honed her skills in international business, strategic communications, and reputation management by working not only at Starbucks, y'all, but at the Clinton and Obama administration. Please welcome Katherine. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you for playing along, you guys. And representing us from coast to coast, this is why we are a national and global alumni association. We have coming live with us from New York City is Amy Masterson. Amy began her career at Starbucks in the stores in Boston in 1993. After a 26-year career at Starbucks, Amy is now the CEO of The Little Beat, a plant-based company in New York City. We're offering health and wellness options. So welcome, Amy Masterson. And also the opposite coast from Los Angeles is Sherri Jefferson. Sherri is an entrepreneur, attorney, activist, teacher, part-time gallery guide. What doesn't she do, y'all? After working at corporate counsel at Starbucks for more than 7 years, she recently leaned into her passion for creating plant-based goodies and launched So Vegan Good. I like that, So Vegan Good, where she is Chief Cookie Consultant. How's that for a title? I love Chief Cookie Consultant. Welcome, Sherri. All right. So I'm excited to have our panelists. I'm looking forward to gleaning their insights. So welcome, and let's dive right in. So what I would say right now is there's a ton of momentum going on around Black Lives Matter, about what it means to be a good ally. And as a matter of fact, today is Juneteenth. And if you don't know what Juneteenth is, Google it. I challenge you to Google it. But take a look at what that date means and the reason why we're choosing it today to have this particular topic. But there's a lot of momentum. And what we want to be able to do is shift that momentum into a movement, right? We want to be able to shift that into a movement. And so what we really want to start right now is to ground the conversation is, given all of what's going on in the landscape, what actually is racial equity? And so to answer that question, I'm going to ask Sherri to kick us off and explain to us what is racial equity. How would you define it for us?
Thank you, Lisa. Well, first of all, just to level set, people conflate or equate racial equity and racial equality. And they're actually two different things. Racial equality seeks to treat everyone the same way and to be fair. However, it's only effective if the participants have the same access to resources for their desired outcome. So that's equality. Equity takes into consideration the differences in individuals and their access to resources. So I'm going to read a definition because racial equity and racial justice are basically the same thing. So I'm going to read a definition and then give you an example. So racial justice is the systematic fair treatment of people of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. Racial justice or racial equity goes beyond anti-racism. It is not just the absence of discrimination and inequities, but also the presence of deliberate systems and supports to achieve and sustain racial equity through proactive and preventative measures, which means it has to be sort of an effort to break down these barriers that prevent people from having their desired outcomes. And a very simple example would be, say you have a school board that's decided that in order to further their STEM curriculum, they're going to give computers to the schools in that district. If they gave the same number or the equal number of computers to all the schools, that's equality. But it doesn't take into consideration the fact that school A may have a lot more resources than school B. If you give school A and school B the same number of computers, that's equality. But if you want to be equitable, you give more computers to school B because school B has a greater need. And that's equity, that's fairness. And it has to be a conscious decision. It has to be a proactive sort of interaction. Otherwise, people will not be able to reach their desired outcomes because you're not taking into consideration the differences in the access to resources. Does that make sense?
That makes a ton of sense to me. So as we look at equity and equality in this space, I'm wondering, is there another or a uniqueness that we can look at it from a corporate angle? James, I'll throw that out to you. You're on mute, James.
Sorry. Thanks, Lisa. And thanks, Sherri, for the definition. What I'll do also is give you another example to kind of help you understand the difference between equality and equity. And one of the examples that I always use with people is if you think about if I asked you to run a race. And so the equality piece of it is that I give everyone a pair of shoes to be able to run that race. The equity piece is that I'm actually giving you shoes, tennis shoes first and foremost, but secondly, shoes that actually fit you and that are actually contoured to your feet to be able to allow you to run the best possible race. And so if you think about it, we're in a race of life in a lot of different ways, and there are a lot of different races that we're running simultaneously. And so to answer your question, Lisa, if we were to use kind of the corporate environment as an example of kind of looking at equality and equity, the equality is that we all have a job at the organization, or we come into the organization with a position in a particular area. The equity is the training, the mentorship, the support, the resources, the development, the promotions that are available to each and every one of us, giving everybody that equity, inside the same space. And for many people of color and Black and brown people in marginalized groups, that racial equity doesn't exist. We don't get the opportunities to get that same training and development and mentorship that allows us to be able to put our best foot forward, show up and do our best work, and then ultimately get that promotion.
Thank you. That certainly resonates with me. I thank you, James and Sherri, for sharing your definitions. I love the tennis shoes one. I think that totally resonates with me. I'm curious though, in terms of we're gathered here to talk about racial equity, using your influence from where you are. I shared earlier on that it was the story of Trayvon Martin that was my impetus for getting into this space and this topic. Can you tell me a little bit, panelists, what makes this moment right now personal for you? And I'm going to start with Amy on that.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I think this has been a really interesting journey for me over the last 10 months, leaving Starbucks and moving to New York and taking on this role at the head of the operations of a company where 95% of the people who work for me are people of color. And I will say, though, that I don't think this really came to a head for me until all of the protests, the concerns, and the conversations around George Floyd flared up. And I remember sitting at a meeting here at Orify, which is our parent company, and realizing as we started to have a conversation that me being someone who spent so many years working for Starbucks and felt like even though everybody around me in Seattle was pretty much the same color as me and very similar to me and had similar experiences, feeling like I was a strong ally, feeling like I had been coached and supported and really internalized all of the values that we talk about at Starbucks, and thought I was pretty great, and I knew a lot, and I knew what I knew. And I've had a lot of emotional, intense, really, really, really uncomfortable conversations over the last couple of weeks, as I've had to realize that I'm a person of privilege who's leading a company of people who don't have the privilege that I have, and who want to do different things with their lives, who want to grow in the company. I've sat across the table from team members who basically have said to me that they don't feel like there's anywhere for them to go. They don't want to continue to be in this position where they don't have a career path, they don't have a vision for their future, they don't have support. And like I said, it was eye-opening for me. It really took me out of my my comfort zone, and made me realize that things have to change, and that in order for me to do that, I have to listen and I have to learn. And as hard as it is for me, sometimes I have to just be quiet and hear what's being shared with me. And so that's kind of where I am right now.
Thanks, Amy. I get that, getting out of the comfort zone. I think right now we're definitely all in a season of kind of pushing our own boundaries. And by the virtue of all of you being on the call today, there is a level of let's educate, let's learn, let's lean in. And so I want to ask that same question of Sherri. Why now? Why here? What makes this topic personal for you?
I have to say this topic has always been personal to me. Growing up in, I think, pretty privileged circumstances, my parents were both professionals, I assumed that I was sort of immune, or I was safe from sort of microaggressions and being affected by inequality and inequity. But that's not the case. I mean, the first time I was called the N-word was in my upper middle class neighborhood. Actually, the only 3 times I've been called that has been in my upper middle class neighborhood here in Los Angeles. So, I was made aware from a fairly early age that, notwithstanding my, quote unquote privilege, I was not immune to being treated differently because of my race. So I think this has come to a head for me when I'm mentoring some girls at a STEM academy, and I remember, and because I don't think that anyone can be successful without a mentor. And I was sharing with this group the other day, when I was at my first law firm, I was speaking to a friend of mine who was a white man, and we were talking about how important mentoring is, but the Black associates were not getting mentored. I would see my white colleagues who were the same level as I am developing these mentoring relationships. And he said to me, well, they just don't know how to mentor a Black associate. And I said, well, intellect and ability aren't dictated by my race. I'm here, they're here, we've all graduated from law school, done fairly well, got into the firm, and yet no one was making the effort to mentor me, to help me be successful. And I understood his point, which was inarticulately made, was that maybe they felt more comfortable with them because they look like them. The problem with that is that, yes, people who look like one another have things in common, have an affinity for one another, so maybe they would naturally be drawn to one another. So when we talk about equity, the whole point is you have to be aware of what you're doing and go against that natural inclination. If that is your natural inclination, recognize that this is a problem, that all of these people are being left behind because you're not recognizing either your implicit or explicit bias. And it's not malicious, but it comes from a place of ignorance, not knowing that you're doing this. So people have to really recognize what they're doing, the way that they're thinking, and how that affects other people, because that affects my success. That affects my ability to move on and to be promoted, or just to learn, because you come out of law school not knowing how to practice law. You have to go into a law firm and you have to learn how to practice law. Well, I'm not going to be able to learn that if I'm not given those mentoring opportunities.
Thank you, Sherri. I think those are excellent points. I think you underscore what James brought up earlier, kind of in his opening remarks around what is equity and equality. And definitely it's personal. It's always going to be personal. And James, I wonder, has it always been personal for you? What makes this moment now so much more important than maybe any other moments? How would you articulate that for yourself and where you are?
Yeah, it has always been personal for me. You know, I'm always quick to tell people that I'm excited that there are a whole lot of people that have become woke, so to speak, and that are joining in this fight against racism and systemic racism. But this didn't just start with George Floyd. Like, you know, racism in America and marginalization of people of color, Black and brown people, like that didn't just start with George Floyd. And, you know, if you in my shoes and imagine as a Black male, you know, every time you on the television, every time someone that looks like you that's getting killed or shot or beaten up for reaching for their wallet or going for a jog in their neighborhood or, you know, being stopped for a traffic ticket, it's frightening. And so this moment is important because I've lived this my whole life. You know, every day I wake up, I have to be conscious about where I'm going, what I'm wearing, how people are going to perceive me, whether people are going to feel threatened by me. And so as I'm navigating just the normal things in my life, there's this additional thing that I'm having to navigate each and every day in my life outside of what, you know, the average white person might be navigating in their life. So that's what makes it really important and personal for me. It's my life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, James. It is certainly our lives. And thank you for sharing that experience and those experiences. Katherine, how is this moment for you? I think, George Floyd aside, right? When the pandemic started out and it was the coronavirus, and then there was this anti-Asian bias that was happening simultaneously. Can you talk to me about that experience for you and what does it or correlate, and what makes this conversation symbiotic to that?
Yeah, I think similar to Sherri and James, if you're a person of color, I don't think that you could say that nothing has affected you your whole life. In different ways, obviously. I mean, I grew up in Bellevue, so it was very white when I was growing up. And, you know, for Asians, they're held up as the model minority. So in a way, sometimes it's pitted against other races, you know, do well like them, stay quiet like them. But for Asian males, it's always been sort of the emasculation of men. And then for women, it's the sexualization of Asian women. And I felt that all throughout growing up, you know, taking the bus. I hate taking public transportation because the memories of, you know, these older men who were veterans who served in Korea or Vietnam and feeling like that, you know, all Asians are the same, and especially women, young girls, they could just go and say and do whatever they wanted to them. But then the cat calls and all that kind of stuff, and it manifested itself more in terms of, you know, if you think about the type of racism that had the xenophobia that had come out during coronavirus, like you'd said, I think that it kind of took the covers off of racism in general. I mean, I think that the deep inequalities are now completely exposed to a level that I don't think we've seen yet. The damage, but for the restaurant owners, the community members, the Asians who've been attacked and spit on, and, you know, all kinds of things like that. You just can't get away from it. But it didn't, you know, like everybody else said, it didn't just start with this, right? And I mean, you know, I've had people call me chink a lot, even in downtown Seattle, where we're so liberal, right? I mean, that's one of the problems I feel like is the Amy Coopers of the world, I think, are the most dangerous ones of all, because it's those people who have grown up with those ideas, manifested ideas of racism, and they're better than you know, they'll sit across from you in a boardroom or at a table or at a restaurant and smile at you, but in their head they're thinking things, right? Or you know, you caught her letting loose, and so I think that, you know, for people of color, that's always been the case. And I think that for Black people especially, it has manifested in a more violent way. And so the coming to a head thing, I think, is just, it has to happen. Something has to happen. But we also have to be very uncomfortable in addressing the fact that there's racism amongst races. And so, you know, there's a strong movement right now for Asians to stand up for Black lives, because you cannot stand back and not say something or not do something to help change things, because we're all, you know, when you're part of a marginalized community, you know, sometimes you kind of look and say, oh, well, thank God it's not me this time, right? I'm sure a lot of people were, you know, this may sound terrible, but I'm sure a lot of Asians were kind of like, oh, thank God it's no, you know, the focus is off of us right now, right? But it can't be that way, right? Because it just builds on. But again, the Amy Coopers, those kind of people that are in our board, in our companies, those are the most dangerous to me, because you don't know what they're thinking, you don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. Those are the people that are sabotaging. Those are the people that are you know, making the little comments here and there, like, well, that person's not quite ready for promotion, or you know what I'm saying. There are these little, you know, we can call them microaggressions, but those are very damaging things. And when you look at the overall, you know, we're so shocked at how few people of color are in certain leadership positions or whatever. We shouldn't be, because that starts from the very beginning. And I'm afraid that with all the wokeness, you know, it's all going towards like what's happening now, but we have to really look at, where did it start? It starts when we are very, very young. You can't take a bias training and you know, anti-racist class and think, I'm cured. I'm no longer racist. I'm an ally. Because here in Seattle, we can take all those classes we want, but if we're not surrounded by people of color, like really, then, you know, it's really hard to do anything about it. You go back to your own life, you go back to your way of thinking. It starts very, very young. That behavior is learned. It's absolutely manifested. So.
Thank you for sharing that, Katherine. I think what's surfacing for me as you were talking is the notion of marginalized people. And as a marginalized community, we're often invisible, right? We're in the margins of society. And what has happened and what has catapulted as of March is making all of this stuff visible and uncovering it. And I think, and as we look at visibility and invisibility in the corporate spaces, you're talking about it, where are those development opportunities not given because we're invisible? I think James talked about it earlier on, like how do we create space and opportunity regardless of where we sit? So that, again, back to our theme of influencing from where you are, and hoping that as our panelists are talking, that you're capturing some things about some tips that you can use that make what has been invisible visible to all of us and to our circle and our friends, and expanding that circle. I know that when we have talked, Katherine, that term that you used really resonated with me. And so if, you know, I think when it comes to that, I want to ask a new set of questions just to kind of underscore our theme a little bit, is, can you give an example of someone in leadership or otherwise leadership role who has made room for you using their influence, using their power, has made room for you, who recognized something unique or different about you that created space for you, as we think about the notion of being visible and invisible in a corporate environment? Let me start with Amy. Amy, how do you start with that?
I think, you know, I've had a couple of different times in my career when I've been helped, you know, by somebody kind of putting me forward or pushing me, I would say, rather, into a place that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with. And, you know, I had a leader at Starbucks when I was working in planning and prioritization for the U.S. business, who constantly just challenged me to walk away from the things that I thought were true about me and to do things differently. And I think some of you may know her, that was Becky Mulligan. But I think the thing that I keep thinking about this as I'm working with the teams I'm working with now, and continually committing and trying to figure out how I'm going to do that for each of them, how I can help people differently than I have before, and challenge them to do, and help pull them into the spaces that they haven't had access to prior to now.
Thank you. Thank you. Katherine, can you share a little bit about what that means for you in your world? And how are you?
So I think, it's interesting because at least in my experience, it's mostly been men who've actually been the ones who've sort of made that space. Couple of men of color, but even up to Martin Coles and Howard. When you're in a room and you're in a room of people, especially executives, and I remember being sort of quieted by a lot of women executives. I don't know. There's this really weird thing about like whether you support women, but then for people of color, there shouldn't be this sort of fight about it, but for some reason there's some weird thing going on there. I don't know, but to kind of be quieted or talked over, and then your ideas sort of dismissed, but then you hear it come out of someone else's mouth later. But then, but I did have the experience, some positive experiences with, like I said, Martin and Howard, who would say, Katherine, you were going to say something. What was it? But I think that's kind of the problem though. I've had a couple of women leaders in my career that had been very good about that, but they've also been people of color. So, it's sort of, I think that sometimes maybe because we also have, women's rights and sort of women have been so marginalized as well. Right. So I think that there's sometimes all these competing, who needs to get ahead instead of like, let's work together and let's all get ahead. So it's a really tricky thing, but I've had kind of both experiences.
Thank you, Katherine. Sherri, how would you answer that question?
Well, there are two people that I can think of. Oops, yeah, I'm not muted. Okay. There are two people that I can think of that really helped me in that way. And one was an associate, again, when I was at the law firm. He was a little more senior than I was, and he was African American. And when he was getting ready to leave the firm, he was working on the 1994 NCAA tournament, and he gave the work to me. And so it was a great stretch opportunity for me. I was a first-year associate. I got to work, and I have a certificate in sports law. So I got to work on matters that I would not normally have gotten to work on as a first-year associate. I got to meet a lot of people in different areas, and just, really got to do some fun and challenging work. And the fact that he entrusted that to me was amazing. Had he not been an African-American associate, I'm sure he would have chosen someone else. And the other example is, again, at the same firm, where I was having trouble finding a mentor. So he took me under his wing, older white partner, took me under his wing and taught me how to write, how to be an effective, persuasive legal writer. And he took his time, and he also let me go into court and argue motions, and again, get the type of experience that I would not have gotten had it not been for him. So, sometimes it takes somebody else to come and say, this person needs help. They need a mentor. They need somebody who is interested in pushing their career forward. And that takes stepping outside of your assumptions about people and doing what is right to help somebody else progress.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that. So speaking of making room, James, can you tell us how do you make room to use your influence in your work or life?
Yeah, as a diversity practitioner, I learned a lesson from a past leader pretty early on. And one of the things that she said to me in one of my first D&I roles was that you don't get to be in the room and not speak up and have a perspective. And so I kind of took that with me into every role that I was in. Even if I wasn't in a D&I role, I always felt like if nothing else, I have an obligation to speak up and to say something and to have a point of view and a perspective. And so, professionally, what I've tried to do, particularly in this line of work in I&D, is I've always tried to make sure that no matter how uncomfortable it is, that I'm always speaking up and creating a voice and amplifying the voice for the people who maybe haven't had a voice or haven't been able to speak up and say anything. On a personal level, I think, for me, as a Black male, I haven't always had access to mentorship. I haven't always had access to leaders that I've seen that look like me, that have been able to kind of create space and help me kind of navigate what I call the minefield, if you will, of the corporate environment or just in life in general. And so what I try to do with people like me and that look like me is, my mom always says, you don't have to fail at everything. And so if there's an opportunity that I have to share some wisdom or to share something that I've learned to help someone avoid that mine that's right before them, or to help them navigate the minefield a little bit easier, then I'm going to try on a personal level to impart whatever little bit of knowledge or influence maybe I have that I've learned to help that person to kind of pay it forward and help make that path a little bit easier for them.
Thank you. That pay it forward is such a powerful thing. I think that's something that we definitely use in our Starbucks vernacular around that. And it's really that one thing, that one mindset thing that I really appreciate as a person of color, is that notion of, I have gotten here because so many others have paved the way and created opportunity and space for me to be able to show up. And to your earlier sentiment about, I don't get to be here and not have a point of view, right? And so that pay it forward is such a strong thing that sits with me very much so. Katherine, how would how are you making room in your work and life? How are you using your influence today?
I think it's similar to James's. I've always been one to speak up and gotten, maybe not gotten ahead because of it, but I think it's important because it is true. If you are able to get into the room, you should be able to speak up and have that point of view heard. I also think it's really important to teach younger professionals. I think that there's a tendency to, I think we hear a lot about millennials right now, and they're, so fired up on this and that, but I think they forget sometimes the steps that it takes to sort of get the, you don't just go and get it done. You have to actually work through, you have to work with people, and you have, there's sort of a convergence of that, right? And I think that's true of how we raise kids too, because you need to teach them the history. They have to be aware of the history, the historical context of racism and of lack of opportunities, and how to be present, and how to to insert yourself in a positive way. And I think that's something that that sort of gets lost when we're sort of getting too fired up over things. We have to have both of those things. And so for me, whenever somebody contacts me and wants me to mentor them or just have a conversation with them, I try to always do that. And when I do that, I also always try to not just tell them on a professional front, like, here are things that, these are sort of things that have helped me along the way, but be in your community. I think that being leaders in your community help you to be better leaders in the workplace. And so that's sort of part of that pay it forward thing too, is making sure that that we all kind of know what our space is and the space that we're in, and how we can show up. But definitely modeling that for younger generations. And, with my own kids, like, I worry a lot about, what are they going to grow up thinking, the things that they see, but the historical context is very important for me in terms of making sure that people remember the things that have happened in the past to help inform the future.
Thank you. That happening in the past to inform the future. I love that. I'm going to write that as my next quotable. Thank you, Katherine. Amy, you're in the epicenter of what has been the news for such a long period of time. And you touched on it in your early remarks about, you know, I think 95% you said of your workforce is people of color. And I'm curious how, in light of the question that we're asking, how are you using your influence in your work and life?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. It's a question that is forefront in my mind right now and forefront in our leadership team. And I think what we have realized over the last couple of weeks is that we can't any longer sit here and think about, oh, these are the things that we want to be a part of the company that we're building. We have to take action. And so, you know, we're working pretty diligently to complete some things for everyone in the company around, you know, anti-racism training. We are actively holding regular open forum conversations with our restaurant teams and with our support team. I'm personally spending time in the restaurants, as I think I alluded to earlier, really just asking questions and listening, and owning up to the fact that what I knew to be true is probably not true. We are working really diligently to map out some clear career paths so that we can help team members understand what's available and accessible to them. We're accelerating our plans to open a restaurant in a community that wouldn't normally have access to food like this, similar to the opportunity stores, the program that many of you are familiar with from Starbucks. And we're actively soliciting involvement from our communities to help us educate and inform and learn about anti-racism. I think, but really what it boils down to, what we're doing is listening and taking action. I think some days my actions may seem small, whether it's sitting with a general manager who reached out to me to say that she felt like she'd never been valued and that her experience was not valued and she didn't see a future with her. And I, you know, those are the things, or future with the company. And those are the things that send me directly to that restaurant to sit down with that person and really understand how I can help. And, you know, I go back to what I said, and I think Katherine alluded to this in her comment. You know, I grew up at Starbucks. Most of my Starbucks career, I worked in Seattle. I felt really proud of the training and the classes and all of the things that we went through at Starbucks, but I wasn't living in the middle of it. And so living in the middle of it and using every chance I can to have a conversation, either with a team member or have a conversation with someone that is not a person of color who I don't think is spending time listening, and really just to immerse and absorb myself in learning. And I think the other thing that is really, really, really important to me, and I talked about this with several team members this week, is that I am really focused on muting my voice and bringing other people into the conversation and allowing them to share their voice. And so I committed to my team that even if it's something that I think I know the answer to, you are going to see me actively out soliciting different viewpoints and asking questions. You know, we had a vendor in this week who was they're doing some work for us on one of the proteins that we sell in our bowls. And he wanted to sit in the restaurant and talk with me and talk with our executive chef. And I actually brought team members over to participate in the product tasting and talk with him about the products. And for me, that I don't see that, I wouldn't have thought that was a big deal. And now I understand that making the actual overt step of purposefully bringing them into that conversation and allowing them to have their voices heard is what's required of me, and it's my responsibility as a leader, and it's what's necessary. So I would say that my work life and my personal life are kind of all blurred together right now, because I'm speaking to people in my personal life through the lens of what I'm learning at work. And don't get me wrong, there is a huge road ahead of us and tons of work to do. So I'm trying to take small steps like the one I just described to you every day that will help us build a culture in our company that can grow outward in concentric circles as we grow.
That's beautiful, Amy. Thank you. You said a lot of noteworthy things right there. I took a lot of notes. Thank you. I think one of the things that stood out is like living in the middle of it. And I think there's no more present time of us living in the middle of change and of a movement. And there was a quote that's once said, if you wanted to know what you would have done in the civil rights movement of the 60s, answer that question of how are you showing up right now? And I think you're demonstrating all of you who have responded, all of our panelists are demonstrating what we can do from where we are right now to move the needle, to accelerate racial equity. And I appreciate Amy and all of you that have commented around creating space for other voices to be heard and amplify and for their viewpoints to matter. And I echo that, I underscore that, both as a moderator and as a person living with this in this very moment, as well. And this conversation and all of the things that you guys have talked about really inspires me in this moment, that in the gravity and the weight of the experience, the shared experience that we're all having, that this conversation inspires me. And so I want to know, what is inspiring you right now? What makes you want to lean in this moment? And I'll open up to whoever wants to jump at that question first.
I'll answer it.
From our panel. All right, Sherri, take it away.
So this is going to be a combination of the last question and this current question. Mm-hmm. I think James and Katherine are right. I think you have to speak up, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Someone once told me that every time you join an organization, you should join it with the intention of becoming president. So if it's a bar association or something like that. I think that in my circumstance where, for example, I'm going to use the Getty, where I am a volunteer docent, obviously I'm not going to become president of the Getty Museum, but I can get myself into leadership positions where I can make a difference, where I can speak up, where my voice can be heard. So since I've been there the last, almost 7 years, I have been beating this drum about diversity and inclusion. And so things that may have made me uncomfortable before, because obviously there were very few people who look like me there. And so what it may have made me feel uncomfortable before are the things that I am pushing for now. So if someone says something to me that I find offensive, I report it. Where before I'm thinking, I don't want to be the snitch. My sister says, snitches get stitches. She's a public defender. So, but if there's something going on, and there are several people who have these preconceived notions about the students that we bring in based upon their race or ethnicity or the school district. Well, I report that because it has a cumulative effect. If you view these people through this lens of being less than, then maybe you're going to treat them that way, and we should be treating everybody equally. And so I report it when it happens. If they see me as a snitch, so be it. I'm doing it for the betterment of the children and the program. I'm now in a leadership position, so I help conduct the interviews of prospective docents. I'm working on the diversity and inclusion plan as a member of the leadership team. So you can stand outside and look in and say, gee, I wish they'd change it. Or you can get on the inside and make changes from the inside. So, that's sort of what's inspiring me now, is the ability to make change and influence and bring people in who can also be part of this change. What was the other thing you asked me? What's inspiring me now?
Yeah, you combined.
That's what's inspiring me now, being able to make a difference and to help others get into this space as well.
Thank you. I'm inspired by that. I think your point about education is duly noted. Such an important thing to speak up in that space. Thank you for that. James, sorry, I think I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. What's inspiring me right now is actually what's happening across the country. You know, I know that we've had instances like this in the past where someone has been killed and there's been rioting and there's been unrest in cities. But I think what's inspiring me the most is that there are people from all walks of life and backgrounds and cultures and races and ages and sexual orientations that are coming together, unite as a voice to say this can't continue. And it's inspiring because, at least in my life, I don't know that I've seen it to this degree. I've also had friends that have, you know, been white that have called and said, hey, you know, I've been thinking a lot about you. And I wanted to call and check in on you and first apologize and say that I don't believe that I've been doing everything that I can as a white person and as a potential ally. And I'm sorry for that. And I want to do better and I'm going to do better. But I wanted to call you and say that to you. And so for me, that's been inspiring me in a way that, now I can't tell you at the end of the day what's going to happen as a result of everything that's happening, but it does make me optimistic that there's a light switch that has been turned on that hopefully will allow us to see the change that we all so want to see. It also makes me think back to, you know, Colin Kaepernick was on a knee protesting this from the very beginning when he started this protest. And, you know, you think about all of the negative press and everything that he got as a result of that. And now people are looking back and saying, gosh, we made a mistake. I'm just happy to see so many people coming together to stand up beside me and shoulder to shoulder with me to say, this isn't going to stand and we want to see change. And I'm optimistic that this will hopefully be the beginning of something powerful.
I echo your inspiration about the movement and what's happening now, and that in the spirit of locking arms and we're in this together, that totally inspires me too. Katherine, what's inspiring you right now?
To me, it's really great to see people posting stories and bringing about sort of attention to all the prominent people. And when I say prominent, people who have just been doing things that we should have known about, you know, people of color that we should have known about. So that's really kind of neat, I think, because all these stories are coming about. But again, the history, right? It's so important to know the history. And while it's maybe not comfortable and it's really, a lot of it's very terrible, like Oklahoma and these things, we need to know these things. So it's inspiring to me that we're actually learning about them. We should have learned about them when we were in school and we never did. So it's I mean, it sounds weird to say it's nice that we're actually learning about it, but that's, you know, it's important. But also I think for me, just being Asian, the solidarity that the Asian community has finally sort of, you know, I mean, there have been pockets of Asians who've come out, you know, after LA riots, you know, the Korean community was at a huge clash with the Black community, but then there were also large pockets of the Korean community that actually came out and said, we get it. We get it. We haven't treated you that well either. So we get it. But I think it's different now. The sort of, that camaraderie of the Asian community coming together and saying, Asians for Black lives. We have stood silent too long. I mean, can you imagine seeing the footage of George Floyd? My heart freaking dropped when I saw that it was an Asian cop that was standing there not doing a thing, right? Those kind of things. So I think that the inspiration that I'm sort of seeing now is that Asians can no longer be sort of, again, the model minority and not speak out when they see something that's wrong. They have to be allies.
Yes, it's the allyship that's so important. I think what's happening now and what I'm hearing all of our panelists say is that the real work and effort that it takes to deconstruct the system is in flight, it's underway. And this movement, this moment is so powerful. And it energizes me that these types of conversations are happening everywhere all the time. and that in the spirit of diversifying our dinner table, our virtual dinner table, diversifying our virtual happy hours, so that we can amplify those voices and make the dirty, the scary things visible, so that we can actually have conversations about them. That certainly is exciting, and I love hearing that thread and that tone come through. So thank you. That wraps it up for all of my questions. Alex tells me that there is a gazillion questions that you guys have been asking in the thread. So what I'm going to do before I get to some of those questions, I'm going to ask the panelists one final thing is, what suggestions do you have for our audience to use their influence to accelerate racial equity? So what tips do you have? I know that you said a lot of tips throughout, but is there 1, 2, or 3, 5, whatever tips that you could share with our audience? And I'll let anyone want to jump in any order that they want to.
I could
Amy,
share a couple. I think I alluded to this in what I was sharing already, but I want to underscore that what has become so evident and clear to me is that it is about taking small steps and small actions every single day, and probably more than one time a day. And that is my fundamental tip, which is, don't feel like you have to find a large action to attach yourself to. Have the difficult conversation with, or the uncomfortable conversation with a family member. Open the door to bring somebody else into the conversation and amplify their voice. Try a different approach to something that allows you to learn and bring in people who have different perspective than you. And you'll find, I've been finding when I do that my conversations, my results, my days are richer and actually achieving more of the goals that I want to achieve.
thank you. Those are fantastic. Sherri?
I think it really is necessary to take a really hard look at oneself, do an honest self-assessment, because unless people really are honest with themselves, and we all have, our issues or our little prejudices or, stereotypes about different types of people, but you first have to break down those barriers within yourself. So it takes an honest self-assessment. Remember, I was telling you about, someone said something to me that was offensive. He assumed that because he's white and I'm Black, he assumed that because I'm Black, he grew up poor, and he assumed that because I was Black, I grew up poor. And there's nothing wrong with growing up poor, but it's the assumption that I grew up poor because I'm Black, and I did not. So I was highly offended by that. And then I wasn't going to say anything because I thought this is our personal interaction. But then I thought about it. How is he treating other people? And he needs to be aware of this sort of maybe unconscious bias that he has, that he assumes that all Black people grow up poor. So I reported him so that he could get some intense diversity training, because he was wholly unaware of how offensive that was. And he hadn't even, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't malicious, it was ignorant. And so, when people are having these have these preconceived notions about other people, they need to stop and look and say, how is that affecting my interaction with them? How is that affecting my interaction, elsewhere? And how can I be an ally until I really take a deep, dark dive and look at myself? So that's what I would say.
I have something
Yeah, go ahead, Katherine.
I have something a little bit along the same lines, because I think I've had experiences where people will make racist comments about Asians, but then when I say, "Are you kidding? Do you even see what I look like?" And they'll say, "Oh, not you," right? Like, "Oh, I know you and you're not like that." And I'm like, well, do you understand that you're being racist too? I mean, like, that doesn't matter that you don't think I'm like that, but you're saying that. So I think that what I would challenge people to do, because I think that it's tough. I think nowadays it's a little bit tough to be white. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of sort of taking on the guilt of all these years, of oppression, some people, and other people are like, please, what are you talking about, right? So I would say, please stop sort of thinking that you can be colorblind, because it's kind of hard to take this away for all of us, right? So embrace the color, but in a respectful way. But if I hear one more person say that they don't see color, I swear to God, I mean, that's not the way to deal with it, right? Because, you know, as we know, you know, you can't erase everything that comes with, you know, with the color of your skin. So understanding and being sensitive, and I don't mean overly sensitive, I'm just saying, like, recognize that it's okay that you see color, because I see color too.
Can I just jump on that? When people say that they're colorblind, that means they're negating everything about me and you, Katherine, and James.
Yep.
Yes, we're different, and not seeing my color means that you're not seeing me. You should be embracing our differences, celebrating our differences, acknowledging our differences, valuing our differences. But when you say you're colorblind, you're telling me that you don't even see me, and all the fundamental things that make me who I am.
And all the experiences that sort of make us why we believe things, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Katherine and Sherri, thank you for saying that, because I was going to add that too. So, you know, Lisa, what I would say is let go of the denial. And so we all have privilege of some kind. So whether that's privilege because we're a man, privilege, socioeconomic privilege, education privilege, et cetera, language privilege. And I know today we're talking specifically about racial privilege. I was watching a show not long ago, and there was a pretty profound statement said that has just kind of stuck me. That denial can be the greatest challenge to eliminating bias and racism. And so oftentimes, you know, because we may not have certain identities that are associated with us or certain lived experiences, it's easy to kind of deny that it's happening or that it exists or that it's present in your professional or personal space. But I think we have to first get rid of the denial that it's happening, because that's the biggest challenge to truly making the change and removing systemic bias or systemic racism. And then secondly, I'd say, and I think I heard a couple of panelists say this, but be bold. Even when it's scary. You know, how many times are you in meetings, whether it's at work or with friends or in personal circles, and you hear a joke that's made that continues to perpetuate bias or racism, but you laugh it off or you don't say anything. And oftentimes I think that happens because people are fearful that in some way they're going to lose that privilege or status in whatever that particular situation is. And so they just don't say anything. But for that marginalized person, that is the person that's experiencing what's being laughed about or talked about, as I said earlier, it's my life. And for me, it's not funny because it may end up in death for me or something else. You know, so be bold, even when it's scary, speak up.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other panelists want to jump in before I take a question from our group?
I just want to underscore,
right.
Say it's okay and you should be uncomfortable. Every conversation that you'll have, if you haven't had them before, or if you're having them with someone new, they're going to be uncomfortable. So be bold and speak up when you hear something, but also I've learned this last week that I just need to ask the question if it's uncomfortable, and I need to be prepared to learn.
And don't take it personally.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I'm gonna take a question from our chat that was given to me here. So it says, I feel like my attempts to engage colleagues of color have been awkward. They understand my positive intent, but honestly, I'm not good at this yet. Is there an example of people who have gotten it right? It's a tough one.
I guess it's,
Katherine.
You go, Katherine.
Go ahead, Sherri.
I guess it's how you try to engage. I mean, I am a person of color, but I am still a person. You interact with me the same way you interact with someone else, except don't say anything racist. I mean, you know, but I'm an intelligent, articulate, well-traveled, well-read, you know, hardworking person. So, you know, interact with me the way you would anyone else. That's the best thing I could tell you. I'm not sure why it's awkward unless, you know, it's always awkward when you're dealing with a person. And I doubt that based upon what you said, but just recognize that I am a person just like you. I'm in the same professional circles and doing the same things, and we probably have a whole lot in common. Just approach me like you would approach anyone else.
I agree. I think that one of the uncomfortable things about now everybody being aware about this is that people are uncomfortable about how they deal with people. You shouldn't be, right? Like it's not like all of a sudden it's something new. So I would also say the same thing is that, if you're dealing with a person, deal with them as a human being. Don't think of it as, oh my gosh, I have to go in and now I'm, oh my gosh, I have to put my anti-racism kind of front on and I can't do, people will make mistakes in how they're dealing with people. But I think that, in general, it's not like you're all of a sudden going to have a different way of dealing, unless you're trying to confront issues of race. That's a different, like, I don't know that you'd be doing that just sort of randomly like that though.
I had a really interesting piece of feedback from one of my team members last week, where she said something similar to Sherri and Katherine, what you're saying. She said to me, don't be cautious. Just come into the conversation and be present and be there and be the leader and do it respectfully. And I'll tell you if you make a mistake and I'll help you. And so, that was really, really a good conversation for me.
For me, I think it's do some of the work to educate and try to meet me halfway. I always tell people I can't be and I don't want to be the, because we are a very eclectic and diverse race and group of people. If there's something that you don't understand, obviously, because you don't have that lived experience or background, then just say that and say, hey, I'm really seeking to learn and understand this perspective, and I'm hoping you can add some texture or context to the conversation for me, and then ask the question. But I do want to know that you've done some type of, made some type of effort to educate yourself and kind of learn as much as you can. But again, there is going to be some context and things that, I may need to add for someone. And I just appreciate them just approaching me, like you said, Sherri and Katherine, like a human first. And then from there, we can engage and we can talk about anything. And the conversation, again, isn't necessarily going to always be a comfortable conversation, but we can't grow and move through this if we don't have that discomfort.
Mm-hmm. And if I can add, I think that the educate yourself piece is really important, because I have a feeling that probably a lot of Black people will become the experts now for all of their friends and their colleagues. And I can't imagine how exhausting that would be, because, not everybody wants to be the expert to sort of educate everybody, right? I mean, that's sort of what we end up doing. So I think, educate yourself first, and then try and have the conversation as not so much that you feel so guilty, you want to learn, you want to do this and that. It's really, it's evolving. I think all these conversations are evolving.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. There's a lot that came in, and so I have another one here. Hopefully I'll read it very carefully and slowly. It says, I work for an NGO based in Switzerland, working on sustainability and social justice in supply chains. We have a number of discussion in our 8-person all-white US office about what we can do to make our organization better represent the diversity of the countries we work in and the communities where our offices are located. The board and leadership are very white. Good ideas have been surfaced, but would love to hear the panelists or attendee thoughts. So that was a mouthful of a question.
So I have a little
Katherine,
anecdote, because I recently had a comment from an executive level person saying, well, we don't really have this, gosh, you guys in the US are really dealing with a lot. We don't have racism in Switzerland. And I was like, not that you see. I mean, like, that's the problem, right? Is that you populate boardrooms and places with who you see. It's again that sort of, who you're comfortable with. And I think that it's, for companies, corporations, they have to stand up more. It's not good enough to give donations to these organizations. You know, all of a sudden NAACP and the EJI and all these are going to get so much money, but it's not good enough for companies just to give dollars. They have to show with actions, and actions meaning your boards. I mean, if you don't have the connections and a network, that says a lot about a global company if they're not able to find people of color to sit on those boards or be part of leadership. I think that there's I've heard a lot of excuses both for why there are few women up in leadership and why there are few people of color. And what I keep on hearing, it drives me nuts, is, well, there just aren't enough qualified people. And it's like, you know why? Because you never gave them an opportunity. And if the qualifications state that you have to have been an executive, then who the hell's gonna have a chance except for mostly white men, right? So.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is, to your point, is that there has to be sort of a top to bottom commitment to diversity. And that requires doing the homework, recruiting people of color, and then not having these sort of, we've all heard this refrain, well, he or she is not a good fit, or we can't find any qualified minorities or qualified women. You never say we can't find any qualified whites. So what is the qualifications that you're looking for that people of color don't seem to have? So there, again, it has to be a recognition of the internal bias that you have, or that the hiring managers have, so that they're opening their minds to the fact that diversity is important. They need to seek it, be proactive about diversifying, and then not holding people to a double standard.
Yeah, and all I would, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, James.
Oh, no, all I was going to say is that, first of all, I think that has to change in terms of the representation in that NGO. But one of the practices that I oftentimes recommend to people is you have to also get good at not being married to, when you're in a room and you're making a decision, that the people sitting in the room are the only perspective, relative to whatever it is that you're doing. And so oftentimes I feel like in my environment, I'll oftentimes say, this feels really good to me, but whose perspective am I missing? What perspective am I missing? And then seeking to add in those perspectives that I don't have in the room or that I could be missing. But you have to first ask the question of whose perspective am I missing, and then go seek out that perspective to get it.
Yeah, and I was going to share that as well. And I appreciate Katherine, Sherri, and James, everything you've said. And I think part of it is realizing that you need a different perspective, and then making a commitment to make that change. I think we've also realized that, if we're going to commit to, we have a pretty diverse leadership team, but we don't have anyone coming up behind them. So I think we've talked about really committing to the growth and development of our team. So if we have people on our team who are interested in growing into different roles and they're not there yet, we're going to put things in place that help them get the experiences that they need. And we're going to give them the opportunity to learn more and grow more and do things that are different than what they're doing now. I think sometimes it takes a commitment to saying, I'm going to bring this person in a different role than I thought I needed, because I actually want to grow them into this higher level role. And those are the types of commitments that I think will be important for leadership teams and companies to make.
Thank you. Thank you all for your questions. For those that we weren't able to get to, we're going to post them on our platform and we'll follow up with them. But with just a few more minutes to go, what I'm going to ask for us to do is we're going to close our eyes just for a moment of silence, just in honor of the moment that we've all been experiencing, and just close our eyes. I'm going to read off some names and just reflect on that. And so, it's the names of those who we've lost. And so, Rashard Brooks, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Oscar Grant, Sandra Bland, Atiana Jefferson, Aura Rose, Stefan Clark, Bothan Jean, Philandro Castillo, Alton Sterling, and far too many more. Now, to thank you for that moment of silence. And what I want to say is, one thing that my pastor said this past weekend that resonated with me is, we just took a moment of silence to acknowledge those who have been lost as a part of the struggle. But the real work comes in, how are we going to advocate and vote and use our influence to ensure that Black lives matter for the living? And I want just to kind of sit with that. How are we going to show up and make sure that the work that we do really honor the living? Okay, so with that, we're going to do another influence challenge. Everybody get their hands out. Okay, we're gonna pivot. Can I see everybody's hands? This time we only put 5 fingers up. This is easy. 5 fingers up this time. 5 fingers, let me see it. Okay, and what we're gonna do is put a finger down this time. Okay, put a finger down if you felt inspired today. Put a finger down if you learned something new today. Put a finger down if you're going to learn more or take the step to learn more about racial equity. Put a finger down if you commit to using your influence to promote racial equity. Put a finger down if you commit to taking at least one actionable step in the next 24 to 48 hours to promote racial equity. Got a fist? Raise your fist. That's power. Yes, that's power. Thank you. Now, thank you so much. Now, what we want you to understand is you have influence, and with that influence, you have privilege, and with that privilege, you again have influence. It's that circle of life. And so with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank our panelists for being with us. And I'm going to throw it back to Marie, who kicked us off with James, to give us some closing comments. Thank you, panelists. Thanks, everyone. Marie?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa. I have to say, your leadership through this conversation and through this program, and as a co-member of our Green Apron Board, you are so appreciated, and your voice is so powerful. So thank you for bringing that to us. I encourage all of us to own this opportunity for change, as each of these moments are part of our daily lives. We discovered many, many insights tonight, at least I did. And specifically how to use our ability to influence where we are. Look around you and see who's missing from the conversation. Calling upon our Green Apron values, I'm going to adopt some new ones. Be bold, be quiet, be aware. With open arms, hearts, and ears, we can achieve the better life we dream of for us and for our children. Before ending tonight, I would be remiss in not acknowledging Alex Pentland for helping drive this event and program forward. Alex, thank you so, so much. This event will be shared on our platform, so please look for it in Inspired Stories program, the group section. And as a reminder, and I'm going to keep hammering this home for many years to come, invite others that are not here. Please get them to join. With more voices, more power, more influence, we can do so much more. Already, take a look at the map on the Green Apron Alliance platform. You'll see members around the world and growing every single day. So keep bringing people in. It's meaningful. As a reminder, please encourage everyone to take lessons from tonight to heart. Have a lovely weekend and be kind to yourself and to others. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. Good night.